Hello everybody, welcome back or welcome to my channel. In today's video we are going to be discussing all of the books I read in January as well as the books I want to read in February. Personally, I don't do strict TBRs. I kind of do a list of books I know I want to get to soon, but I am a massive mood reader, and so I will pick up a book based on my mood. If I'm in the mood for a fantasy, a mystery, whatever it may be. I also decided to do something different this year and make a playlist on Spotify of a year of books in songs. So for every single book I read, I am relating a song to that book to kind of just join two of my favourite things together, which is music and reading. So when I'm doing the reviews for the books I've read, I will tell you the song I chose for each of them. I will say in January, I did have a really good reading month. I read a lot of books, well, not that many to be fair, I read like 5. 4 and a bit, I guess you could say, because one of them I have not finished yet, but I'll kind of give you my opinions on the book itself anyway. Now, 3 of the 4 that I completed were on my Kindle, so I'll put a picture of the book up somewhere, and the other one was in physical form and I did annotate it. I will also say I was in like a book slump for pretty much 2 weeks of January, which were the first 2 weeks. And it was interesting. It wasn't fun, but I did get back into reading. I read a bit of a mixture of genres, to be completely honest. The first book I read in January was Heated Rivalry. I did read it because I wanted to get around to the series, but the series is currently not available in Spain, which is where I live, which is so annoying. But it's supposed to be coming on the 5th of February, so I will be watching that and you will hear my opinions of it. Heated Rivalry, if any of you are not aware, is a hockey romance, and it's about 2 opponents from different hockey teams that have grown up hating each other and having to compete against each other, but they actually like are romantically seeing each other off the ice and they have to keep it secret. It's a contemporary sports romance. I loved it. I've not read a sports romance where it's 2 like players as the characters. I've read obviously the Windy City series, and I've read a few of the off-campus books and other just sports romances where it is a player and then just a character. But reading from the perspective of having 2 main characters that are the love interests for each other in the same sport on opposing teams was such a fun dynamic. I will say it took a while to get to full-on plot because the first chunk of the book was very spicy and very smutty, which wasn't necessarily like a bad thing. I just am someone who loves to have story and background. I think it was fun to jump from different times because that's obviously when they were seeing each other. I think both the character developments and the way that they were written about was really good, as well as the whole coming to terms with like their sexuality. That was very well written about as well. And I did end up giving Heated Rivalry 4.5 stars. I didn't give it a 5-star, only from the perspective of what I said of the big chunk of the book was without any kind of backstory or really just knowledge of getting to know the characters. Then I moved on to the fourth book in the Crowns of Nyxia series, which if you are a long time watcher or have watched any of my videos where I'm reading, I think I bring up the Crowns of Nyxia series quite often. It's written by Carissa Broadbent. It is a vampire fantasy world. The series itself is kind of made up of duologies, and there's also a couple of novellas in between that are separate. They're still within the world, but they are separate from the main characters of the series. And I would say they are definitely interconnected, but they're not standalones. Like, you can't read a book without reading the other. They do interconnect and follow on from each other, and you meet characters from new books in old books. And the series itself is kind of made up of duologies. So you have the first two books, which are focused on Rain and Araya, and then the second two books, which are focused on Mish and Asar, which is the second book in that kind of duology that I read, which was about Mish and Asar, and the book was called The Fallen and the Kiss of Dusk. I started this book in late 2025, and I did end up soft DNFing it, and I did do that with a couple more books that are on this list, just because I was not in the mood to read much, and on top of that I had read a lot of 5 stars in 2025, and so it was continuous book hangovers of really, really good books, and I could tell I was going to love books, and I was scared of getting into another hangover, so I'd put one down and pick a new one up, and the same thing would just happen. So it's one I did start last year, but I did finish it in January, so I'm counting it as a January wrap up, as a couple of other books. But I remember reading like 40 something percent and loving it, and then the pacing fell off partway through, and that for me personally did not enjoy it. I wasn't sure if it was intentional, because I know Carissa Broadbent is very intentional with her writing, and I love her writing, and she has such a talent for like gripping you within a first chapter, a first like paragraph, even just a first line, and that is definitely how I felt. There's also a lot of scenes in this book which, if you've not read any of this could be a slight spoiler, but between Mish and her sister Sasha, and being someone who has an older sister, seeing that dynamic really got to me, and I did cry. And so I am a massive masochist when it comes to books. If a book makes me cry, it makes me feel very deeply, the rating will go up. However, pacing is also a massive thing for me, and because I could not tell if I was meant to feel like the pacing in like the middle of the book was going up and down between action, no action, like all over the place, I ended up giving it a 4-star, which is not bad. I do think it would have been a bit lower if the pacing towards the end of the book had not picked up, as well as if I hadn't have connected with the characters as much as I did. I will say, so far in this series, Rain and Araya will forever be my favourites, I believe, because both of their books, I think, got 5 stars. And then the next book I read was also on Kindle, which was The Housemaid by Freda McFadden. Now, this is a book I've been wanting to pick up for ages, and I personally have not read many mystery thrillers in my book lifetime. However, I know Freda McFadden is an incredible writer. I know so many people love her, and for a good reason, because I did love this book. I decided to pick it up this year. One, because it is also one that I ended up soft DNFing last year. Not because it was good, I was very much enjoying it, but same as I was saying earlier, of like, I felt like it was going to be a very high rated book by me, and I did not want to fall back into any type of slump. And on top of that, I picked it up when I was travelling, and I think picking up a new book when you're travelling, if you've not already started it, can not always be the easiest thing to do, because travelling in itself tires you out. And so the last thing I wanted to do on a short flight on top of that was read, and I felt like I couldn't concentrate properly, so I ended up putting it down and picking it back up this January. And the entire premise and plot and storyline of The Housemaid I loved. I did not see any plot twists coming. I love going into any type of mystery thriller of the few that I've read, not trying to do my normal figuring stuff out. Like if I'm watching a TV show and it's like a crime TV show, I will try and figure out who it is that did it. And sometimes I think I enjoy programs and TV shows and books of that type of genre or plot better if I just kind of go with the flow. I'm reading the pages, and that way I do get shocked when stuff happens, unless everything is extremely obvious, in which case then I won't enjoy it. I think there is definitely a right way to write a plot twist, and Freida McFadden is very good at that, and I know she has a lot of books. I did, as soon as I finished it, because I finished it at night, the next morning I went on and downloaded The Handmaid's Secret onto my Kindle, which is the second book in the series of The Housemaid, because I loved it. And I also picked this book up because I want to watch the movie, and I did want to read the book before the movie because I think that is the best way to do it if you can. Obviously there's movies I've seen without reading the books because I was young and wasn't that into reading, or whatever the case may have been. Needless to say, I do think this is, out of the few I've read, my favourite mystery thriller ever. I loved everything, the writing, the shorter chapters that made it feel like I was reading quicker, and I did give this a 5-star. If you are not too sure about what The Housemaid is about, I will say it's obviously a mystery thriller, and the whole plot is Nina, who is married to Andrew. They are a couple. They have a daughter who is Nina's, called Cecilia, and Millie gets hired to be their housemaid, and she's living in the attic, and you see the whole story unfold with a lot of twists and turns, and it is very fun to read, if I do say so myself. We're now moving on to the first and only physical book I read in January, which is The Ballad of Never After. This is the second book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. I read the first book last year and it got 5 stars. For any of you who don't know, I'm not going to go too much into the plot of obviously this one because it's the second one and it does follow on from the first book. But the first book, Once Upon a Broken Heart, is about this young girl called Evangeline, and she makes a deal with one of these fates who can grant wishes, but obviously at a certain price, and she makes a deal or a wish with him to stop a wedding, and you see the entire story unfold from there. This book, I didn't know what to expect because obviously book one leaves you kind of with an open ending to follow on to this one, and there were so many things in this book that I was just not expecting. I did decide to annotate it because I know I loved Stephanie Garber's writing in book one, and I know obviously 5-star for a book one, so I know I was going to enjoy it. I do think I also annotated Once Upon a Broken Heart. I need to go through and sort these tabs so that you have like a little bit sticking out, because I do kind of not like the messy look right now. But The Ballad of Never After, I loved this so much. I think I read it basically in 2 days. I had this book finished, and that was with family coming over, other people coming over, my watching Dune Part 1 with my dad. I did read so much of this in one night. It's so easy to read. Stephanie Garber's writing is just incredible. There were so many things, like I said, that I was not expecting. I love the fact that we also not only see the development and stories of our main characters, Jax and Evangeline, but we also see those elements with side characters like Lala and Chaos. I love how both books link perfectly. There's no gap holes, there's no loopholes, everything feels very real. I love how when I was reading this, I felt every single emotion that the female main character Evangeline was feeling when she was in like denial about stuff that was happening. I too was in denial about things. I'm like, there's no way that's true, and they were, which is crazy. Needless to say, this was also a 5-star read for me. I do think this series is going to be one of my god tier along with the Empyrean series, and I'm so excited to read the next book. I also want to read another series by Stephanie Garber, which is Caraval, which people say is kind of linked to this, but I'm not sure. I do want to say one element I loved is, and I'm going to try and say this as spoiler free as possible, a big thing happens at the end and then she almost corrects it and repeats it because that makes perfect sense for what it was, and that's all I'm going to say, because I don't want to get too into it. But yeah, Caraval is supposedly kind of linked to the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, so I do want to read that at some point as well. And I will mention the other book I started in January but have not finished, which is book 1.5 or 2.5 of the Crowns of Nixia series, which is the first novella in between books in the series, and it's called Six Scorched Roses. And like I said, it is in the Crowns of Nixia kind of universe land, but it does not follow the main characters from the first books, Rain and Araya. It does follow other people, but I think Carissa Broadbent's writing is just one I really enjoy reading, and I will tell you everything of my opinions about that book in my February wrap up, because that is when I'm likely to finish it. But I thought I would mention it as I did start it in January, so I felt like it needed to be mentioned. And I'm now going to tell you the songs I related to each of the books I read. So the first book I read was Heated Rivalry, and the song I chose for it was Pushing It Down and Praying by Lizzie McAlpine. Obviously that song is so incredibly vulnerable, and if you read between the lines, it is kind of about being with a certain person while thinking about someone else, and I think, and craving that someone else you have feelings for, and that is just Ilya and Shane down to the bone. I think that song, anytime I hear it, I just think of them, and I think by doing this whole playlist, I will inevitably be doing what I always do, which is anytime I hear a certain song, like anytime I hear an Alex Warren song, I just think of Fourth Wing, and it pains me. But you know what? I'm a masochist, and I love what I love, so why not mix the two together? The second book I read in January was The Fallen and Kiss of Dusk. The song I chose for this book is Idols Part 1 by Youngblood. I think the song in general and every single lyric makes me think of Misha and Asar and their journey through the third book and fourth book in the Crowns of Nixia series, specifically the fourth book, with everything that happens. If you've read it, you probably know, and if you hadn't not heard that song, I recommend listening to it and thinking of Misha and Azar, because it is possibly the best like match of song and book that I can think of. The third book is The Housemaid, and I was stuck between a few songs for this one. I did think Nobody No Crime by Taylor Swift, but I thought that was probably a bit too obvious and I want to go very niche. I then thought Control by Halsey, and there was another one about, I think it's Song of Achilles or something like that. But ultimately I thought, let's really think about this and think about my niches and what I love and enjoy, and not go with stuff that might be a bit obvious. And I chose Cell Block Tango from Chicago the Musical. Incredibly niche, but I think it not only sums up The Housemaid perfectly, I think it will also sum up the entire series perfectly once I finish it. And for our last book, which was The Ballad of Never After, I chose Sad, Beautiful, Tragic by Taylor Swift. And personally, I think it sums up the book very well. And that is all the detail I'm going to give you, because I feel like if I say any more, it might give spoilers for any of these books. And obviously for the fifth book, the Six Scorched Roses, which kind of sounds like a tongue twister, to be completely honest. I obviously have not chosen a song because, well, I don't have one because I've not finished the book. I'm now going to move on to books I want to read in February. Now, I have a big stack of physical books here that are on my shelf, my TBR shelf specifically. I also have a few books on my Kindle, so I'm going to go through and just tell you which ones there are. Now, I have ordered the second book in this series because obviously the only one I have is the first book, which I have read. I read this, I believe I read this in 2024, maybe even 2025, and it is The Way I Used to Be by Amber Smith. 5-star read for me. I love this, and I've been wanting to read the second part for ages, but because I have the physical book, I wanted to also have the physical book in the obviously second one. And so I was waiting and thinking and deciding when to buy the physical book, and I bought it the other day, but it's not going to get here till like the end of February, so I might scratch this one off and do this in March. The other one is one I found at the bookstore I went to when I got a few books. I can't remember. I think all of the ones I got are in this stack actually, and I have not read any of them, but we're gonna ignore that fact, you know. And it is called Amelia If Only by Becky Albertalli. The cover is absolutely gorgeous, and it is a contemporary romance. It's also LGBTQ romance, woman love woman romance, and I just think it's quite a short book, so it should be very easy to read. And I do believe it's also YA. The only thing that concerns me is how modern this book is going to be, because it does talk about like social media apps and stuff like YouTube, and I think it's strange to have those elements or to read about those elements in books, because obviously that's like, we have that and this is supposed to be some other kind of world, but it's obviously modern. So but the back says, Amelia Applebaum isn't in love with Walter Holland. He just happens to be her favourite moderately famous, chaotically bisexual YouTuber. Amelia just knows sparks would fly if only she could connect with Walter for real. If only he would host a meet and greet. If only it were just a short road trip away. And if only Amelia could talk her friends into making it the perfect last hurrah before graduation. Even her newly single, always cynical best friend Natalie. One thing's for sure, all roads lead to butterflies, but what if Amelia's butterflies aren't for Walter at all? And I thought this could be like a very cute, quick, fun romance to read. especially with obviously Valentine's coming up in February, I thought about reading different types of romances, like a dark romance, a YA romance and a romantasy, all for Valentine's Day, and that'd be a video, so I think that could definitely go towards it. Another book I do want to get to, but it's quite a big one. I don't actually know how long this book is. Okay, wait. It is 624 pages, and it's the second book in the ACOTAR series, which is Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J Maas, obviously. I read the first book, A Court of Thorns and Roses, last year, and I did very much enjoy it. I think I gave it 4.5 stars, just because I didn't quite give it a 5 because it was introducing us into this world, and there was a very slow build up, and I tried reading it like twice before actually fully getting into the story. But if I am reading this, I think I want to buy the other 3 books in the series because I don't have the full series yet, and read them all together and do like a big video for that. So it's kind of a maybe. It's a maybe. Another one I want to read is obviously The Housemaid's Secret, which is book 2 in Freida McFadden's The Housemaid series. I do have that on my Kindle. I also have the 7-Year Slip, I believe it's called, on my Kindle, and there's a few my sister also chose on my Kindle. How many times did I just say on my Kindle, because I feel it was probably way too many. I also got a dark romance called The Priest, and it's part of a series by Sierra Simone, and I know it's quite a popular dark romance series. I got it at the same time as I got Amelia If Only, as well as The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which I have a hardcover of over there, and I will get round to eventually. But the synopsis of The Priest says, there are many rules a priest can't break. A priest cannot marry, a priest cannot abandon his flock, a priest cannot forsake his God. Tyler Bell has had no problem playing by the rules for the past 3 years, after a family tragedy set him on the path to priesthood. That all changes when the delicious, sultry voice of Poppy Danforth sinks its claws in him through the screen of his confessional booth, and he can't get her sins out of his head. It should be easy to put his impure thoughts of her to rest, considering the vows Tyler has taken. It should be nothing to overcome what the sight and sound of her does to him, when his life with the church means everything. But once he has his first forbidden taste of those red lips, Tyler can't help but break all his rules for Poppy, no matter what it might cost them both. Now, the series of this is Priest, Sinner, Saint, and I don't know if it's in that order or some of them are swapped around, but again, definitely want to get around to this, as well as the other physical book I have, which is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, I believe is how you say it. I'm not entirely sure. And this is another like psychological thriller mystery. It's one that's been on my TBR for years and years and years, and it says Alicia Berenson lived a seemingly perfect life until one day 6 years ago when she shot her husband in the head 5 times. Since then, she hasn't spoken a single word. It's time to find out why. I have been wanting to read this for so long, so I'm gonna pick I think 5 books I'm gonna put on like a priority list for February. If I don't get around to them, I'll get around to them at some point. I'm not someone who does TBRs to fully stick to them. I just do them for fun, and which is why I also don't call them TBRs in any of like my book journals. I will call them priority reads of if I'm in the mood for a mystery thriller, I have 2 choices or whatever it may be. just to open up that book a little bit more. And I think mood reading for me is the best way to go, because it just allows also the ratings and reviews for the books to be at their full potential, because I was in the mood to read it. I think TBRs in the past I made very like it, I have to stick to it, and that made me not enjoy reading as much. So now I'm trying to make it a bit more fun and less strict. So we're going to make a list of 5 books, I'm going to say, that I want to get to. I think based on what I have here, I'm going to say Priest is definitely on that list. And I'm going to say Amelia, If Only, is as well. They're both pretty short books, so they should be quick reads. I also want to read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which is a fantasy romance. It's similar to Once Upon a Broken Heart in the fact of the main character, Addie LaRue, makes a deal with this like Lord of the Night kind of. And it follows her throughout that. I'm like 60 pages into that, so I think I should finish that in February. Other than these, I think on the Kindle, The Handmaid's Secret, which is now 3, The 7-Year Slip, which is 4, and the last book I'm going to choose for February, because February is also a pretty short month, if it gets here in time, because I also ordered it along with The Way I Am Now, which is the second book to The Way I Used to Be. People We Meet on Vacation, because obviously the movie for that is out and I want to watch that, but I want to read the book first. So hopefully it gets here in time for me to read it before February's over. Because I also want to watch the movie for that. If you happen to enjoy a lot of book videos as well as just vlogs in general, then you'd probably love my channel, because that is what I do. I am heavily book focused, but every now and then I do like to just be honest and talk about my life, both good and bad. And if that's something you enjoy, make sure to subscribe and join this little corner of social media where I try to stay positive and just to follow throughout the journey of my reading as well as life in general. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you hopefully in my next video.